Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Classic Universal Horror Podcast. I am your host, Jay Jennings. I am a Universal Horror collector and historian. And on each episode, we tackle a subject that relates to classic Universal Horror, whether it's a film or an actor or a location or makeup. Our first show was on Jack Pierce. But our second show, oh, by the way, hi, Baron Lautos and Burgermaster, welcome to the show. You can see these two are here because today's special show is the Universal Draculas. We're going to take a look at all four actors who played Dracula, starting with Bela Lugosi, and then we'll look at Spanish Dracula, and then we'll take a look at Lon Chaney Jr., and then, of course, Baron Lautos, played by John Carradine. And to join me on the show of shows to talk about the Universal Draculas, I don't think there's anybody better than the one and only Courtney Joyner. Hey, Court.
Hey Jay, I am just raring to go.
You crawled out of the crypt?
Yes, sir, I did.
Was John in there with you? Hey, Court.
Always in spirit.
Right. Baron Lantos is always here. But I thought there'd be nobody better than you because you know your Universal Horror like nobody else. And then I add my little 2 cents. And I just thought it really hasn't been done before where we can just pick apart what we liked and maybe didn't like from the Universal, the four Dracula movies. The Universal Dracula set the tone. And of course, it all began with Bela Lugosi, who played him on the stage. But I mean, there's Nosferatu and other kind of vampire movies in the silent era. But I think when Lugosi came out, it was a sensation because it shocked people for that time, 1931 audiences. I mean, he didn't have fangs, but he was leaning toward people, and was he biting into them? Was he an animal? Was he the undead? So let me ask you, when you first saw it, I mean, obviously we were born much later, but when you first saw Dracula and Lugosi and his presence, what kind of effect did it have on you?
Well, he was so autocratic, and I remember that when I would go to a department store or something with my mother, if there was a Castle Films display, the Castle Films digest of Dracula, which I do have, I could run in and get it. Was always on display, and there he was, holding his cape out. And in the 60s, a number of posters of Bela Lugosi as Dracula were marketed in record stores and comic book stores and all that stuff. So, including that image right there. So he was immediately identifiable, and I think now, and there's been a lot of legend and hoo-ha around that movie. But the one thing that, of course, now is so surprising to people is that he was not the first choice by a long shot. And there's Michael Blake, who is absolutely the world expert on the history of Lon Chaney, has always disputed this idea that Universal had Lon Chaney, and he has never found any evidence of that or a negotiation for a contract with MGM where Lon Chaney was under contract for Universal to borrow him. And of course, he was already ill with the throat cancer. So I think that might be a little bit of press agent wish fulfillment that kind of kept building. But I think, too, that the idea of Conrad Veidt always seemed like, excuse me, always seemed like a legitimate choice. The idea of Conrad Veidt always seemed to make a lot of sense because, of course, he had starred in The Man Who Laughs. And that was for Universal. It was for Junior Lemley. So those pieces seemed to fit. And for some reason, they were just kind of avoiding Bela Lugosi despite his success of Dracula on the stage. And then these other things didn't work out. And there it was. He was the next in line, but had made it really be known as, that he really, really wanted to make this movie. And he'd already been in. So, that ultimately is the true irony, because to this day, if you say Dracula and somebody decides to be playful about it, they're going to do a Hungarian accent. They're not going to try and sound like Frank Langella or Gary Oldman or something. It's still Bela Lugosi. That's it. That iconic voice and military bearing and all the other things that he brought to it have stayed. It became, cultural landmark.
I was going to say his mannerisms and his style and his diction and his cadence of how he pronounced and he did his hands and his fingers that nobody else has even come close to bringing, and they couldn't if they even tried.
Well, this was all things, of course, from his own experience on the stage, and which meant playing to the back row, so everyone could see what he was doing and relate to it while they were watching the show. And that kind of, I don't want to say exaggeration, but the exactness of it. This is an incredibly measured performance. And there is not a false move in it. There's nothing ever that feels improvised or, out of left field or anything like that, or even slightly out of control. This was just dead on right. And Lugosi had his way of doing it, and this is the way he presented himself in the film. And you know, Jay, so glad we're talking about this because the movie has taken a lot of hits in the last decade or so. Oh, it's not that good. It's not this. It's not that. I so violently disagree with that. First of all, to see the film, and I wasn't always the biggest Dracula guy, but if you ever have a chance, and I mean the editorial Jay, as you know, the impact of that movie on a big screen is incredible. And I think so many people are used to seeing it on television or whatever and reduced. It's it's an entirely different experience. And what Todd Browning did by slowly approaching Lugosi, by exploring Dracula's castle with Dwight Frye, by pushing his camera, which was Carl Front shooting it, of course, and even using sound in an interesting way from this early film, which 19 shot in the late 1930. Sound was still brand new, and everybody forgets things like that wonderful moment when they discover the ship where the crew is dead and everything else. You don't see anyone except the corpses as the camera moves through the ship, but you hear everybody's reaction before they open the hold and they find Renfield. So there's experimental things in it, and the heightened sound effects of the insects and the rats and all that stuff. So there's just an awful lot going on that I think over the years, whether because everyone was so familiar with the movie or whatever, became less and less appreciated. And I'm glad it's kind of coming back into its own again.
Yeah, it became, I guess, chic to bash it after a while. It's such a classic. It's like, oh, it's been around for almost 100 years. It's like, oh, that boring, slow moving, no music except for Swan Lake movie. It's like, no, 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 no. Lugosi made the film. I think if anybody else would have starred in it, any of the people, even Conrad, like you said, Veidt would have starred. I don't think it would have had, even though The Man Who Laughs is brilliant, I just don't think he would have brought anything Lugosi did or anybody else who would have.
Yeah, it's Dwight Frye's just cut his finger on the paperclip.
Right, and he's just noticing it in that little drip of blood, and Lugosi moves toward him so slowly, not like a crazy animal like in some of the later films, and it's very subtle. And even and later on, when Edward Van Sloan as Dr. Van Helsing, says, I've discovered something very interesting that I'd like to show you. And he opens up that mirror, and it's just so cool, Cord.
Oh yeah, and he smashes it out of his hands. Yeah, for the cigarette case, and it's that reveal of that side of Dracula's personality. This is really the moment where you see the animal-like, eruption with the character, because everything else is a seduction. That's an explosion.
Right, and then they have, of course, the classic battle of wills with the once again the one of a kind hand gesture. I think if I did that, I'd get arthritis. Court. Um, it's just so wonderful to see. I mean, these are that's why it has so many memorable scenes. This scene, the scene knocking the cigar box over with his wives, with Renfield like crawling on the dirt. Renfield, telling him on the boat, "We're here. I know you can't hear me, but we're here." Stuff like that. It's not lacking in any classic moments. That's why it's regarded, I think, by most people as one of the top three greatest horror films ever made. Court.
Oh, absolutely. And two, they were very smart, whether it was Junior Lemley or Todd Browning or whoever was making this decision to bring other people from the stage performances to the movie. Well, and also, too, when having Lugosi opposite, say, someone like Helen Chandler. Now, she unfortunately had a drinking problem, but when you look at her, you can see it almost. I just mean that she projected a kind of frailty. So you see why she was going to be targeted by Dracula as a victim, because essentially she couldn't be anything else. And Francis Dade, of course, also that's the famous shot of him leaning over the bed and everything else. But she's the sex bomb of the two of them. And so, and of course, she's already attracted to him and all of that stuff. But Helen Chandler is, if you will, even though she's frail, it's in a way, it's more of a victory for Dracula. But you understand it because she, in her own private life, was kind of projecting, I think, her own weaknesses a little bit, and I think that comes through in her performance.
Oh, it does. And everybody is excellent in their role. The wives, they deserve credit as well, the three Dracula wives. And it's just a great film as we bring our look at Bela Lugosi to a close. It's tough to, I mean, the next three actors, I mean, they did their best. And we love Chaney and we love Carradine. But it's just no one can hold a candle to Bela Lugosi. Court.
Well, it was that impact, and also, let's face it. I mean, the one thing about Dracula, no matter any way you cut it, whether you love the movie, you hate it, you think it's creaky, whatever the criticism is, without Dracula, the other movies would not have happened.
Right.
Not at Universal, and I think that a lot has been made out of this idea that Carl Laemmle Jr. made it in defiance of his father. That's been blown, I think, way out of proportion because Carl Sr. had been buying properties that had a fantastic quality to them back into the 20s. So this idea that he completely dismissed horror and fantasy and everything, and that was not part of the studio program. I don't know. That has always seemed to be way exaggerated to me, and that Dracula was this great defiant production. Because that just doesn't seem to add up.
A classic movie, top three of all time, no doubt. Bela Lugosi as Dracula, and his performance will always go down in history long after we're gone for generations to come. But what's interesting as we segue, Court, while Dracula was being made, you'll be able to expound more on this than I am. Universal decided to, I guess, reach out to the Spanish market, which was weird because it was their first horror film. It's not like they waited 3 to 4 to 5 Universal films in. They didn't do Frankenstein and the Wolfman and the Mummy, Invisible Man. Okay, now let's reach out to a Spanish market. But they didn't reach out, and it wasn't like they made it for the French market or they didn't make it, for any other market. They decided to just make a Spanish Dracula. I mean, that was the Lemley's plan. Maybe you can expound a little bit on how that came about and where they found their lead actor, Carlos Villalarios, to play that Dracula, and he does his best to mimic Bela
Oh,
Lugosi. I mean, with the hands and how he leans over the body. So tell us what you thought about Spanish Dracula as I show some photos.
well, I think also there's been some fog around Spanish Dracula because it's a beautiful production, But one thing you notice, it was not a Spanish director. It was George Medford. So uh, the everything had been, the rules had been laid down. They had the sets, they had everything, and then you have Lupita Tovar, who is just this stunning woman who happened to be married to Paul Kohner, who was the agent who represented practically everyone under contract at Universal. And with Lupita's involvement, that it was also their, if you will, entree into the Spanish market and that talent pool. So there was a lot going on there behind the scenes to make Spanish Dracula worthwhile. And what Universal was doing was looking at the numbers because, of course, in these days, there was not the opportunity for the dubbing that became so common. So they literally would have to do new versions of movies in another language. I mean, one of the most famous, there were great stills of Boris Karloff in a film with Laurel and Hardy, Pardon Us, but he was in the French version, not the English language version.
Right.
So this was just the process.
What do you
And
think? What do you think about Carlos's performance? A lot of people kind of think it was maybe slow and meandering. I thought it was perfect. He was trying to mimic Lugosi and talk in Spanish. Maybe it didn't translate well.
trying to, if you will, get Lugosi's intonation and things like that, but he is Hungarian. Carlos was Spanish, and trying to combine, if you will, the two cultural accents, that was not an easy task. But they were smart because they knew that there had to be an echo of Bela Lugosi. It's one way or another in this film.
But it doesn't have the long-lasting appreciation that Dracula had. But still, as we look at some more stills here, the set pieces were the same. They didn't have to do much, Court, to duplicate Dracula. But they're two different films.
But it being two different films, despite being shot on the same sets in the evening after Dracula had wrapped for the day, and so it was creatively, it's in kind of a weird spot because they did want it to basically duplicate what Todd Browning and his cast had been doing earlier that day. And and it definitely succeeds, but it is not leading the way, if you will. It was not breaking that new ground that Todd Browning and Lugosi and company broke.
It's a very well done film, and it could even be in the top 50. I mean, because it still reeks from that kind of classic horror feeling. I mean, the set alone, if it's still going to kind of I guess linger off into whatever film is there, thanks to the original Dracula. But it is just lacking, and maybe there's a separation due to the Spanish language, because I don't think at the time, Court, I forgot, did they put subtitles on the bottom, or you just had to watch it as is?
I think you just had to watch it as is. And also, as far as the regard for the Spanish language Dracula, uh, that really happened because, thank God, Universal found very nice copies of the movie. I mean, I never saw the film when I was growing up. It wasn't running on Chiller Theater. And I think that the discovery of it and reintroducing it to an audience, in the 1980s, gave it kind of a leg up as far as reputation and regard, and people going, "Oh my gosh, this is the Dracula that I had always wanted the Bela Lugosi to be." But I think it was just because so little was known about it, and then suddenly we had the chance to see it, brand new.
It's not like it was playing in theaters on double bills throughout the 30s, 40s. You're right. It was like it was gone. And then during the age of home video, it's like, oh, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Court, I think one of the Universal MCA VHS releases put Spanish Dracula as kind of like a double bill, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right with that? If you can watch Dracula and then afterwards you watch Spanish Dracula?
They had it as a single, and then I think you're right. I think they did release it as a double.
Right.
And again, I think it was just kind of a matter of the comparison and people leaning towards Spanish Dracula. Again, just because it was the brand new kid on the block.
Right. So let's bring that topic to a close. I think we've covered both the Carlos version, Spanish Dracula, and the Lugosi version. As I said, both classics, but obviously the original, I think, holds its own. But I'm glad the second Spanish one was discovered. It would be a shame if it was still lost, like London After Dark, London After Midnight, or something like that. You know, it's, you keep hearing about it and hearing about it, and you don't see it. So it's a good thing it did come out. And the '80s was a good time for classic horror film appreciation. People were writing about
Oh,
it and stuff like that. So let's move on to our third Universal Dracula. And it's one of my favorites. Lon Chaney Jr. as Count Alucard. What's Alucard backwards? And when the initial scene where Lon Chaney Jr., I mean, obviously it makes sense because he was succeeding his father, Lon Chaney Sr., as the kind of the man of a thousand faces. And, you know, I think Chaney is the only one to play all the major characters, if I'm not mistaken, Court Wolfman, Mummy, Dracula, and some others as well. And but I think Son of Dracula, which it was called, 1943, if I'm not mistaken, when he comes out of the coffin and he's floating down the bayou, standing on a small boat in that eerie pond.
well, the thing is, too, when we talk about Son of Dracula, I think it's impossible for us not to mention George Robinson because he became the director of photography. Joe Valentine shot The Wolfman, but Robinson went all the way back to Dracula's Daughter, which is a wonderful movie and really shows the sexual side of the Dracula family, if you will. And Robinson was so skilled that when he collaborated with Robert Siodmak, they wanted to bring to Son of Dracula this idea of the supernatural bearing to the scenes that dealt with Count Alucard.
And death.
It it wasn't Frank Craven in his doctor's office in his home and all this kind of, and being at the railroad station and regular day-to-day life there in Louisiana. But when you crossed over that threshold into Dark Oaks, the fantastic plantation house, they wanted it to feel gothic. And that moment in the swamp when the coffin ascends out of the water, then you see the mist, and then that great shot of Lon Chaney, who's on a plank, and they were pulling him along, but you never see his feet. You don't see, yeah, that's it. And you just follow him. And they did also another wonderful and very unusual shot when Robert Page uh, is running through the woods. Remember, he's being followed by Count Alucard as a bat, and they did a shot above the bat, so you see the bat flying after Robert Page. It's like an aerial shot. It's incredible, and these were all things that Siodmak and his director of photography brought to it. Going, look, this is still Dracula. It's still a supernatural being. It's a horror film. Let's show things in that context, in that lens, in direct contrast to whatever else is going on in the film. You know, the sheriff's office doesn't look gothic. Well, it's not supposed to. It is where Count Alucard is. That's the gothic element of the movie. And boy, they just captured it beautifully. And as far as Chaney as Dracula goes, what he brought to it was physical power and a short temper. And when he grabs Robert Page by the throat and throws him across the hallway, crashing through the double doors, that to me really is a precursor to the physical power that Christopher Lee would later demonstrate when he's throwing people around.
What you say makes sense, Cord. I think this film, there's a sense of dread and its gothicness, and this actually the topic of the entire film is death. Because early on, Robert Page's, I don't know if his wife or fiance is riddled with bullets because he's trying to shoot Count Alucard, and of course bullets can't harm him, so it goes right through him. and kills
Louise Albritton.
Louise Albritton, right? And she's beautiful. I love Louise Albritton. I mean, she has such a natural beauty, and they made her look very gaunt and ghostly with kind of a whitish makeup.
Jay, you hit on something. There's that one shot, and I've never, I mean, I've asked some people who were around Universal at that time, they never really knew, where I think she is wearing makeup that is like phosphorescent. That shot of her in the bed when Frank Craven comes into the bedroom and her face is luminous. Now, what George Robinson and Siad Mack did, but it's amazing the way they focus the light, and it does. It seems like it is reflecting the light back to the camera lens, and it's incredible. And of course, Louise Albritton, was known for comedies, and she was a blonde, and she was not happy with that wig, although she looks fantastic in it. But they wanted someone visually to be the contrast to Evelyn Ankers, who was playing her sister.
The horror goes into another mode. She is now back from the dead. I mean, obviously, Count Alucard has brought her back, and she just floats on like the Robert Page character. You can now join me, even though I'm dead. It's very bizarre and kind of odd. She's treating like it's all okay. I'm dead. You're alive. We'll still be together. I'll convince Alucard, even though he loves me, that I still love you. So it also becomes like a love triangle, Court. What would you say so?
Absolutely, it does. And that moment when Chaney enters, while Robert Page and Louise Albritton are having, this conversation, and you see the rage on Dracula's face, and what it is it's jealousy.
Right.
He does.
Why would Dracula be jealous? That's odd, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful because it's like he does not want anyone interfering with his marriage.
Right. I mean, she's dead now, so she's his. But that Robert Page where he grabs the throat. There's lots of scenes like that, especially towards the end where Count Alucard's grabbing a lot of throats, and he's very angry. Either way, it's fantastic, and the whole storyline, and also Robert Page's character is having a tough time convincing the sheriff, I guess, that he's dealing with a member of the undead. And then there's that kind of occult researcher who is played by, I forget the actor's name, Court.
J. Edward Bromberg.
Right, and he kind of believes him, but he wants more proof. I think he has a kind of a book with him on the undead, right? And he just keeps going into it to get more information.
Well, yeah, well, Bromberg is essentially the Van Helsing of the piece, and he's very good in this movie. He's very serious. He was later blacklisted, but he generally played kind of semi-comic foils in movies like The Invisible Agent and things like that. He's kind of rotund and would stumble over himself. But if you remember in the Inner Sanctum movie, Pillow of Death, he is the medium who Lon Chaney's wife gets infatuated with because he can communicate with the dead. So he played these parts, I think, very, very well. And his one of the more impressive things is just a moment where he's just on the phone with Frank Craven, where he says, "Be very careful of this man. He is no one in their right mind would choose to name themselves after Dracula. He's insane."
Right.
It pushes the story into a slightly different direction, and I think too what you and I have always said about this movie with its so interesting a setup. Of course, that came from Kurt Siodmak, but Kurt Siodmak blamed his brother for having him fired from the movie and replaced by Eric Taylor, who was a Universal contract writer. But Eric Taylor had worked on the script for The Ghost of Frankenstein, also for George Wagoner, who was producing this. But Kurt Siodmak had some hard feelings about Son of Dracula, I think.
Well, that's well documented. But I think also, Court, not only is this movie about the undead and Dracula's back, but he wants a bride. There's a love triangle. He's being chased by a Van Helsing character. I mean, there's a lot going on.
No, you're right. It is absolutely loaded.
So that's what a lot of these films have in common, this sense of dread. People are being killed.
Well, there's also, I think, when the movie was made, and George Wagner was a very smart producer, but there is one, and it's a minor thing, but it always did distract me, is that they did not have John P. Fulton erase Lon Chaney's image from the mirror in the hallway, in
Oh, yeah.
the house. Now, it's not as grievous as Bela Lugosi in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, but it is. It always did kind of bug me because it's Chaney by himself. He's not with another actor or anything that would complicate the optical. So these movies were made for a set amount of money, and I'm sure that we're not the only ones who ever noticed it. And they probably went to the production department and they said that would cost an additional $2,500 or something, and forget it, you're not getting it.
Right. And another one of my favorite stills is this one, Court, where Count Alucard's holding a shovel.
Well, the thing with the shovel, of course, too, he's trying to recreate a grave, and there's I think too that uh, if you will, the lighter moments would be kind of unintentional, uh, except uh, when Chaney really goes for it, and he is horny as hell when he and Louise Albritton are alone.
Tell us about this scene near the end where this is basically his destruction.
It is his destruction, and what I think is interesting is that there you see, and Chaney could play scenes like that very well, is the panic, because there is no uh, refuge for him once the casket with the dirt from Transylvania is destroyed. That's it. He has no place to go. He is vulnerable. And what I love about that moment is not only the physicality of it and Lon wrestling with the stunt man and actually throwing him into the flames, but later on, Robert Page's character then goes and he incinerates the love of his life. He incinerates her body.
That was kind of odd. I mean, just he could have lived with her, but you know what it was? It's this Puritan thing that existed in a lot of the horror films, where even though your love of your life or a family member, kind of like the monkey's paw, someone could come back. It's not right. It goes against the laws of God and nature. So it's best to burn the body or bury it. And also, he's a zombie at the end, Robert Page, right, Court? He's a zombie.
He's just totally shell shocked, and that beautiful shot that Siodmak did with the fire burning across the silk curtain, and it separates in front of the lens. It's wonderful, and the Son of Dracula, just like the Mummy's ghost, has a down ending.
And that brings us to our fourth and final Universal Dracula, and that is the great John Carradine as Baron Latos. And he brought a kind of an aristocratic sense to his portrayal, completely different than Lugosi and Chaney Jr. He's not angry at all. I mean, he does devious things that are downright evil, injecting his blood into the doctor and trying to seduce the doctor's nurses and secretary. But there's kind of you have respect for him in the way he portrays Dracula, and he plays two parts. He's also one of he wants to fool you. There's no Alucard, there's no Dracula backwards, forwards. He's completely somebody else. He's an aristocratic European, baron, and then by night he turns into a bat. Court, what's your take on that?
I think you're right. This idea of his, if you will, he's not hiding, even though he uses a different name. Um, he isn't being, I don't want to say sneaky because that's the wrong word, but he's very about himself. Let's just put it that way. And he's charming, and he is very continental, and has a very interesting bearing. Now, of course, you're talking about a man physically who is quite a bit smaller and certainly thinner than either Bela Lugosi or Lon Chaney. So his presence is different. And
Right.
the top, all of the, even though Lugosi, of course, had a top hat in Dracula for a few scenes, is very much, if you will, he's the Dracula you would meet at a dinner party. Let's
Right.
put it
No,
that way.
no Dracula wears a top hat like John Carradine court.
Exactly. And Edward T. Lowe, who wrote the scripts for both House of Dracula and House of Frankenstein, had and he went back to Universal in the 1920s because he worked on the script of Hunchback of Notre Dame. But Lowe had collaborated with director Earl C. Kenton because he had written the screenplay to Island of the Lost Souls over at Paramount. So they had a very good working relationship. And they were kind of creating this brand new world. Now, Kurt Siodmak had written that original story, The Devil's Brood, to bring all the characters together. But Universal kept announcing that project so many times. And at one point, the Mummy was supposed to be in there. And at another point, they announced that the Mad Ghoul was going to be part of the entourage. And all these, none of these things, of course, came to pass. But I also that Carradine's Dracula is, I think, through the years, been vastly underrated
Absolutely.
because he is sinister, and boy, you do not want to leave a female alone with him.
Right. Or get a blood transfusion. You know.
Yep, yeah, he goes for it.
And he brings something different than the previous actors. He kind of brings, as you said, a European aristocrat kind of feeling to it, but it's just the way he spoke, and he said different kind. You know, like he puts a ring on Anne Gwynn's finger and it doesn't fit, and he goes, "Don't worry, it'll fit soon."
Well, that's the thing is that House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula were part of Universal's campaign to build Carradine because he had been in The Invisible Man's Revenge, he had been in The Mummy's Ghost, he had been in Captive Wild Woman. They wanted another horror star, and again they were jumping over Bela Lugosi, although he was also in a number of these movies during World War II. But they wanted someone else. They had Lon Chaney. Karloff had cost them a fortune to get him into House of Frankenstein in the climax because this was after the success he had on Broadway in Arsenic and Old Lace. And Universal wanted another under contract horror personality. So they decided to build Carradine. And I think having him cast as Dracula was absolutely perfect. And again, you're talking about, yes, the voice and everything else, but also you're talking about an actor. We think of Carradine now because we think of some of the dreadful movies he did in the 50s and what have you, although we love him in them. Invasion of the Animal People and the Al Adamson stuff. But when he was at Universal and he was making these movies, he had done some low budget films at Monogram and what have you, and had even co-starred with Bela Lugosi. But if he was known to audiences, it's because he was the Bob Ford that shot Tyrone Powers as Jesse James. He was the bad guy in a series of John Ford movies like Prisoner of Shark Island and, The Sinister Gambler and Stagecoach. So this was a guy with a different kind of pedigree for audiences. And that's why I think that the casting of him as Dracula was unusual and it was interesting. And I think that's what it caught audience attention.
He was just so special in the role. I mean, he played him twice in House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula. And what's interesting is you kind of have to ignore that he was resurrected. He came back after, he's turned, but twice he turns into a skeleton. And of course, just simply starts off being subservient, which was, I also knew Court, because he says, if you prepare the soil for my coffin. If you do that, I'll do whatever you wish. So it's kind of, he's the first in the line of Draculas, or out of what came before, to actually he'll be the servant. He'll be in servitude.
That was it. You bring up an interesting point because it was a Dracula with a vulnerability that he acknowledges from the get-go. And of course, the way that Professor Neiman and friend Daniel get rid of Dracula, I think is that's a great sequence in that movie. And it comes from the fact that director Earl Kenton and the producer Paul Malvern had this huge background in westerns. So they put a stagecoach chase in House of Frankenstein. I mean, and it's very well done. I always loved the shot of J. Carrol Naish jumping from
They're after Dracula.
yep. And then, they dump the casket out of the back, and then it goes on to that beautiful soundstage hill where, Carradine, is struggling to get to it before the sun completely rises. And you really brought up an interesting point that this was a Dracula who was at the mercy of other people at different times. That was a little unusual.
But in those scenes, I mean, why even? I mean, he actually that's his goal. He wants to. You feel for a second leave the life after 500 years of, living off the blood of innocent victims. But then he becomes old Drac again. Screw that. I'm still gonna bite necks and have brides. But for a minute, you feel for him. He wants to leave the life court.
No, that's it. The whole thing of going to Onslow Stevens, can you perfect a cure and everything? And there's that little moment. It's just an interesting little thing that they do, and actually two moments I should say. One, when Jane Addams sees Martha O'Driscoll and Carradine in the hallway, and they do that great thing with the blank set behind the open wall, which in fact they then put a frame around so it looks like the mirror. I love that shot. It's tremendous. And the double for Martha O'Driscoll is perfect. You see them without, it's not an optical, it's an on-stage effect. So you can see Dracula not casting a reflection in the mirror that in fact was not there. It was just a big open space. And then that really cool little moment when Jane Addams faints because Carradine is switching his blood with Onslow Stevens, and the ground glass shifts over the lens of the camera, and then she drops to the floor. I always thought that was a really cool little touch that they added.
You notice whenever Baron Lautos is hovering or visits someone playing the piano, they always go from playing something nice and fun and mellow to something dark and mysterious. And I've never played this before. That's my favorite song. So he does still have influence in little scenes, Cord.
Oh, sure. You're creating it.
You're creating it. That's right. So in a whole, the four Dracula scenes or the four Dracula actors are just fantastic. But for 18 years, for an 18-year period, 31 to 48, Universal Classic Horror was the mainstay. It was classic. It was done right. It was mysterious. You looked forward to it. The audiences back in the day, the audiences would line up around the block to see the next Dracula or Wolfman or Mummy film, because that's what I mean. It was during the war-torn years, of course, and it was an escape. But I just think Dracula is just a character that's been written about over and over again. I mean, Bram Stoker, wrote the novel and stuff, but I just think these four Draculas set the stage, especially the three, if you want to leave the Spanish one out. But you got to include it because it's historically accurate. But I think Universal Dracula movies, Court, are special, don't you think?
They exist in their own world and time and space because certainly House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, now they do seem to be period pieces, but Universal was kind of inconsistent with that stuff because you could have somebody driving a stagecoach in one scene and then driving a Packard in the next one, so you never quite were aware of the time period. And with Son of Dracula, despite the Mummy pictures were the only ones that ever really acknowledged the war was going on, Son of Dracula absolutely could have had, Robert Page's character in the military or whatever, but they stepped away from all of that to create their own universe, Universal Universe, for these characters. And I think that gives them an endurance. It gives them if you will, their own immortality because they can't be pegged, they can't be pinned down to a certain time and place in our own history. They just exist and could be, the stories could be transferred to any time.
Oh, absolutely. They're timeless, Court. You can't take the, you can always pull the stake out and resurrect Dracula, supposedly, and then a new story will take place in some weird far off place, whether it's the swamps or it's New York or London or the Old West. But Court, this was a fascinating discussion of the four Draculas. Thanks for your input as always.
Oh, well, this was a ball. Are you kidding? This was just what I always love to do, Jay. And thank you for asking me to jump in here and yak.
Well, I want to thank the great writer, director, novelist Chaney Jr. for joining me as we discussed Universal Dracula. My name is Jay Jennings, and I hope you'll come and join me soon again on the Classic Universal Horror Podcast as we discuss other things that go bump in the night. And so, as always, until next time, stay scared.